the government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations, our discussions with our American counterparts.
This is a kind of propaganda against U.S. citizens. You know, it's psyops. Why would the government of Ontario? I'm told that they have spent or were planning to spend up to $75 million on these ads to come across the U.S. border. So what was the purpose of that other than to sway public opinion?
Of course, that is some reaction to the decision by the U.S. president to terminate trade talks with Canada following that ad by Ontario, anti-tariff ad. The ad did run again over the weekend during the World Series, and it featured clips by the former Republican president, Ronald Reagan, expressing his stance on free trade. So was all of this effective? Was it a disaster? Can trade talks get back on track? Let's bring back the Sunday Scrum. Ian Bailey, a reporter for the Globe and Mail. Catherine Cullen, the host of CBC Radio's The House. And Robert Benzie is the Queen's Park bureau chief for the Toronto Star. He's in Toronto. I'm going to start with you, Robert Benzie. I don't know. Does Doug Ford believe that this worked? Does he think it backfired? Do we have a sense of where the Ontario government is now that the ad is going to be pulled and the trade talks have collapsed?
Well, I mean, the ad was effective, Rosie. I mean, I wrote the first story on this ad when it was shown to a private audience on October 8th. It hadn't been released yet, and I thought it was an effective ad, but the government of Ontario wouldn't give me a copy of it so I could look at it again to write my story. So I had to go back and watch the entire 5-minute Ronald Reagan speech from April 1987, and it is accurate. The ad's accurate. The ad quotes Mr. Reagan accurately, and it's a good reminder to a lot of people that Ronald Reagan was a free trader. He's also the guy who gave Trump the slogan, or Trump stole the slogan, "Make America Great Again," from Mr. Reagan. That was President Reagan's 1980 campaign slogan, "Let's make America great again." Mr. Reagan, as we all know in Canada, because Brian Mulroney, our prime minister, made the first free trade agreement with President Reagan back in 1988-89, that was a significant thing in our history. Our economy has improved. The American economy improved because of that deal. And I think it's interesting to me that President Trump, who his hurt feelings over this ad have magnified its impact, so that Google searches on President Reagan are up like 400%. People are talking about tariffs on Canadian products in the United States as a way that they haven't been doing for many months. So yeah, I think it was effective. It's not great that trade talks are off. It's not great that President Trump is unilaterally trying to threaten 10% increase in tariffs, but he's worried about the Supreme Court ruling that you were speaking about with Senator Tim Kaine, and I think he should be worried. I don't know that there's no emergency. There's no reason for these tariffs. It's a phony rationale. It was effective politically for Mr. Trump for a while, but the economy in the United States is sputtering. Prices are going up. And this ad was effective. If I were the Democrats, I'd be running a version of this ad throughout the next year, right up to the midterms.
Well, and you saw in the earlier hour too, BC's it's very different. It's a digital ad, but it's specific around what is happening to the cost of lumber in the United States because of Donald Trump's tariffs. It's hard to know, Catherine. Yes, to Rob's point, totally. People are talking about it in a way maybe that they hadn't in a while. But on the other hand, now we got a prime minister who can't get on the phone with the president and doesn't have any negotiating, and progress was being made.
I have a ton of respect for Rob, but I'm going to have to disagree with him here. It was effective only in the sense that it had an effect. And I think we have to say that effect is clearly not good for Canada. Did it have the desired effect? Yes, Ontario's stated purpose was actually not to influence Donald Trump. It was to influence the American public, I believe, around the question of tariffs, right? But the result, we look at it, I mean, this is bad. And I think Friday, it looked not great. It seemed like this was not a terrific situation, but we knew Mark Carney, he's got a pretty good relationship with Donald Trump, it seems. So maybe this could be smoothed over. Maybe the negotiations could be started again. But I will say this addition of 10% tariffs, and it's really not clear right now what exactly that means for Canada. I think you try to talk to people who are, in sort of some of the inner layers around these negotiations. My sense is they don't really know either, right? They always want to be very cautious. You want to see this stuff in writing. How bad is it? Is it 10% across the board? Is it 10% 10% Kuzma only. We know that's a smaller blow. This didn't have the desired effect. I do think it's really interesting seeing the way Mark Carney and other leaders are handling this. Mark Carney over in Asia sort of talking about Doug Ford like a bit of a knucklehead, like, "Aw, shucks, Dougie, what did you do?" I do think there is something happening here where there is an effort not to hurt the Team Canada energy too much by laying blame on Doug Ford. You know, there has been, I think, quite a lot of support of him, but you have to acknowledge that this is not a situation Canada wants to be in, and we don't really know how deep it is, but it's not good.
Yeah, I can't remember who said it now because there's been a lot of people on the show today, but someone said at least the Prime Minister can say if he gets in front of the President, well, it wasn't my ad, not my
Brian
idea.
Clow, I think,
yeah, Brian Clow. Okay, good. Someone was paying attention to the show. Ian, what do you think the Prime Minister has to do here? Because it doesn't sound like Donald Trump wants to talk to him.
Well, this is a pretty remarkable situation. Before the Prime Minister, this generally was a gentle ad. Donald Trump's name is never even mentioned in the ad.
Yeah.
I've never worked in advertising, but I could think of much tougher ads. It doesn't seem like an unreasonable approach to sort of make the case to the American public on tariffs using the words of Ronald Reagan. It's obviously remarkable. Anyone with a smartphone in a few minutes can go back to that speech, the text of it or the actual speech, the whole speech, and see that the president is operating from some very flimsy logic. This all now hangs on Prime Minister Carney. We'll see where this goes in the long term, but obviously in the next few days he will encounter Donald Trump. And the pressure is on the Prime Minister, I guess. How does he approach Trump? How does he diffuse this? Whether he can, it's clear that President Trump has spoke admiringly of Prime Minister Carney. Was that fake? Has that changed? And so, like I say, the pressure is going to be on the Prime Minister to see if he can turn this around in his encounters with the President at ASEAN and obviously at APEC.
Even the president's response late Friday night there, Rob, where he said, "Oh, they're playing dirty. I can play dirtier." How do you negotiate with someone like that? I don't know what. Listen, the Prime Minister has lots of experience negotiating. Surely he has some thoughts, but I just don't know what the next move is for Canada here.
And Rosie, that's why I think this kerfuffle over the ad is overblown. There was always going to be something that would derail talks with Donald Trump because the only thing predictable about him is his unpredictability. And I actually think this is one of those weird occasions that it helps Mark Carney. It helps Carney because he can say, look, I can't control a premier of Ontario any more than you can control the governor of California, Mr. President. There's that. I also think that it shows Canadians that this is why Canada can't get a deal, because you're dealing with someone, as Tim Kaine was saying to you earlier, Rosie, who's petulant, who's not logical. And I actually don't think the court's going to rule in his favor. And I think that the Senate's going to have a hard time in that vote that the Senator Kaine was talking about with you. It's going to be hard for Republican senators who, a lot of them are Reaganites. A lot of them are free traders privately. I've spoken to some American senators who are publicly pro-Trump, but privately want free trade with Canada. So at some point, this is going to be pushed to the forefront. And I do think this ad is an excuse. Mr. Trump initially talked about the ad saying I would have done the same thing, and then a few days later he's in a maniacal mood and he's tweeting and look, I think he's getting a lot of bad publicity over this ballroom debacle, destroying the East Wing of the White House, and he's got other problems. Prices are going up in the United States. The average tariff on American goods is now 18%. It was 2% a year ago, Rosie. So prices are going up. Americans are feeling the pinch.
Last 30 seconds or so to you, Catherine. Is that what the PM's going to do, just sort of wait it out for Americans to start feeling it more?
I did think it was interesting when Brian Clow said at this summit, Mark Carney needs to be, I'm going to use the word stalking the hallways, trying to find Donald Trump. They do have a good relationship. Mark Carney has been employing humor throughout this, joking about the Blue Jays. He's trying to take the temperature down. So I think ideally the next step is a connection between the two world leaders that helps move the conversation in a direction that benefits Canada. But we took several steps back in terms of this discussion over the last few days.
Ian, Catherine, Robert Benzie, nice to see you all. Thank you for doing this. Enjoy the rest of your day. Appreciate it. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump raised tariffs on Canada by another 10%. Trump didn't elaborate on when the tariffs would take effect or what they would be applied to, but it comes, of course, just days after Trump said he's done negotiating with Canada, calling off trade talks yet again. This time, talks terminated over an anti-tariff ad the government of Ontario has been running across U.S. TV networks.
Canada, they did a crooked ad. They knew it was Ronald Reagan loved tariffs. What they did is really dishonest. And I heard they were pulling the ad. I didn't know they were putting it on a little bit more. They could have pulled it tonight.
They're not pulling Monday.
Well, that's dirty playing. But I can play dirtier than they can, you know?
That Ontario ad invokes the words of Republican President Ronald Reagan against Trump's signature policy, tariffs. The ad has continued running through the weekend, notably during the World Series, but Doug Ford says it will be pulled from U.S. networks as of tomorrow. Here is a bit of the ad.
And sometimes for a short while it works, but only for a short time. But over the long run, such trade barriers hurt every American worker and consumer.
Both Prime Minister Mark Carney and Trump, as we said, are now in Kuala Lumpur for the ASEAN summit. The two leaders currently don't have a meeting scheduled, but Carney is, of course, now faced with the task of trying to bring Trump back to the table and restarting talks.
The government of Canada stands ready to build on the progress that we had been making in our negotiations, our discussions with our American counterparts. It is the sole responsibility of the government of Canada to have those discussions with the United States, and it's the best way forward. And as I say, we stand ready.
The tariffs continue to disrupt and damage provincial economies right across the country as provinces obviously hope for the talks to resume as well. Last year, Prince Edward Island exported 92% of the province's agriculture and agri-food to the U.S. Rob Lantz is the Premier of P.E.I, and he joins me live from Charlottetown this morning. Nice to see you, Premier.
Rosemary, nice to see you.
So the trade talks are over. How worried are you that they will not get started again?
Well, I guess we should just look at exactly where we are. Yes, the trade negotiations have paused, but otherwise, not much has changed. Trump has he's threatening these tariff increase, as you said. I'm not sure when it will be applied, what it will be applied to, but we've really got, we're getting used to these action, reaction. It's happened before, but there's really no reason to doubt that negotiations can't pick up exactly where they stopped. The PM, you just played a clip there. He said that Canada's ready to talk when the U.S. is ready, and I certainly encourage us to get back to the table. And the U.S. approach is very relationship-based, and I think the Prime Minister has done a very good job of establishing that relationship, and I encourage them to get back to the table.
Well, so it is relationship-based, and obviously the Premier of Ontario has a different approach. Those ads will be suspended starting tomorrow. But do you think they were a mistake, Premier?
Doug Ford has been a very strong voice for Ontario. He has been very effective at communicating the frustrations of Canadians. I know that he feels very rightfully so that the auto sector is in the crosshairs here. I respect Doug Ford very much. He's been a very, very effective communicator on these issues. His ad was very clever, but he's decided to pull it. And I respect that. And now we can continue to move forward.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about what's happening in your province. Lots of businesses have had to pause shipments. I talked about how much agriculture is dependent on exports to the U.S. Give me a sense of what you're feeling because of all of this.
Well, generally, trade has become more and more important to us. In Prince Edward Island, we've become a very strong trading province. Trading growth has been very aggressive here. And thankfully, we are primarily CUSMA compliant. The effects of this trade dispute have been, in many ways, minimal to this point. But, There are other things that, don't get mentioned a lot. Even the de minimis removal, the exemption for de minimis removal is problematic for small businesses here.
Right.
The heart of our economy and our communities are really suffering at the hands of a greater issue over which they have control. Of course, the Chinese tariffs on our seafood are problematic.
Yep.
I haven't heard a lot of mention of this, but these are also a big issue that's at play. That often get overlooked in discussions about the larger sectoral tariffs with the United States. So we do have questions, concerns, but we are faring well to this point, but we're all feeling the anxiety that all Canadians are feeling at this time.
What do you think the Prime Minister should be doing to get these talks started again? Is there anything he should be putting on the table, taking off the table in order to get this going?
Well, I don't think we're at the point that we need to make any more concessions. We just need to get back to the table. And I'm not at the table, so I don't know all the details of what's happening there. But
Sure.
I support the team. I believe they're working very hard to get the best possible deal we can get. I have faith that they were making progress. And I think we just have to trust the process. We have to trust that we can get back to the table, and we absolutely need to get a deal on this tariffs issue and put it behind us. But there's no question, these are the most challenging trade negotiations in our lifetime. It's very complex, and it's complex because we're a very big country. We have different regional interests, and that's the strength of this country, our diversity. But it also makes these negotiations very complex. So I just hope that we get back to the table as soon as possible and continue where we left off.
Premier Rob Lantz, nice of you to make the time for us on this Sunday morning. Thank you, sir.
Thanks very much, Rosie.
Appreciate it. Frank McKenna is a former Canadian ambassador to the United States, and he joins me now with his thoughts. Nice to see you again, Mr. McKenna.
Good morning, Rosemary.
What is your reaction to what we've seen unfold over the past 48 hours or so? The end of the talks and now this threat, or I guess notice, of an additional 10% tariff?
Well, it's just a normal day in the life of President Trump. And it's one of his calling cards, and that is unpredictability. And I understand Premier Ford's frustration. He's losing jobs in the auto sector, in the steel sector, forestry sector. He feels the pain of those people, and he's expressing it. Also, I have to tell you, one of the reasons why the ads are so controversial is that they have a strong grain of truth. President Reagan would have hated these tariffs. And I think it probably is hitting a nerve within the Republican Party, who are torn between the MAGA Republicans under President Trump and traditional Reaganites who believed in free market economies and smaller government.
Yeah. I think your analysis is probably dead on there, but I do wonder, does that mean that the ad was effective, or does that mean that the ad backfired, given that now everything has been pulled, off the table because of Mr. Trump's President Trump's view of the ad?
Rosemary, you never know what provocation will arise. Colombia's in the bad books now because the temerity suggests that the United States had blown up a boat with fishermen on it. So they're now under a tariff regime. Brazil is under tariffs because they had the temerity to prosecute Bolsonaro, who's a friend of Trump's. So it's so unpredictable from time to time. What I think we do know is that it's not for the reason stated. It's nothing to do with an effort to try to influence the Supreme Court. It's got much more to do with creating a distraction. Perhaps the president didn't like the reaction to the wrecking ball on the White House, or perhaps it's a negotiating strategy. We were getting too close to a deal and he wants to push us off the puck a bit. It's just very difficult to know, but we will prevail. We're strong as a country, united as a country, as the Premier of Prince Edward Island has just said. And we have a lot of assets. We talk about energy and oil and so on. We have an increasing reserve of oil, whereas the United States has a declining reserve. And as Benjamin Franklin once said, you know the worth of water when the well runs dry. And as resources in the United States dry up, or are in short supply, the resources of Canada will become even more important and give us greater leverage in these negotiations.
So what do you think the Prime Minister should be doing right now, Frank McKenna? Waiting it out? He is. I'm not even sure he's uttered Donald Trump's name since Friday. He certainly made a point of not saying it the first time he reacted. I'm not sure he said it there in Kuala Lumpur either.
Well, I just listened to a speech a few moments ago from Asia, and it's extremely aggressive about diversifying the Canadian economy, investing within the Canadian economy, $500 billion in investment in growth, and investing in Asia, $1 trillion diverted towards Asia. So I think he's doing the right things. Trust but diversify. To paraphrase Ronald Reagan, we need to continue to work with the United States because we're their neighbor and biggest trading partner, and that's not going to change. But we need to diversify so that we end up having leverage in the talks. I always recall from my time in Washington the words of Will Rogers, diplomacy is the art of saying, there, nice doggy, until you can get your hand on a big rock. And for us, the big rock is leverage. We need to diversify and have our aluminum going to Europe, or potash going to South America, or oil going to Asia, our critical minerals, whoever pays the best price in the world, so that the United States comes to us and bended knee and say, look, we need Canada, we need the diversity of your raw materials, the supply of raw materials.
Do you think that's really going to happen, Frank McKenna, that they're going to come to us and say, let's get this going again?
That's what happened in 1979. Essentially, it was around oil. 1989, that trade agreement was around energy security for North America. The unfortunate thing is that it takes time. It's going to take time for us to diversify our resources. We made the mistake of trusting so much in America that all of our oil is flowing south instead of diversifying and having pipelines going around the world. And the same is true for other commodities. And it's going to take us time, and we're going to have to go through pain to get there. But we have to use this moment of crisis once and for all to diversify our economy. And I think that's where we're headed at the present time. And I think there's great unity in Canada around that. I think we know we're going to experience pain, and we're prepared to do it to protect the sovereignty of this great nation. Frank McKenna, always nice to see you. Appreciate you making the time, sir. Thank you, Rosemary. Have a good Sunday. Brian Clow is the former Deputy Chief of Staff of former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He led the Canada-U.S. relations war room in the NAFTA negotiations during Trump's first term, and he joins me live from Toronto this morning. Nice to see you, Brian.
Good morning.
You, of course, are very familiar with issues upsetting the president, angering the president, and him walking away. What do you make of what has happened over the past couple of days?
Clearly, the Americans are upset about, I think it's a number of things. It's not just the ad. The Canadian negotiating team earned some criticism from the White House this week for failing to do enough in their view. And to me, that's probably a good sign that the Canadian negotiating team is standing up for our interests at the table. All that said, we don't want to be in this position. I think it's a good thing the ad was pulled. Hopefully that allows Mark Carney and Donald Trump to have a good moment together at some point on this Asia swing, and talks can get back on track.
What did you make of the Ontario government's approach? You know, part of what we've been seeing over the past couple of weeks is provinces all sort of pulling apart a little bit as they try to defend their own interests, which is, you know, what a premier should be doing. But in this case, his choices, his decisions have affected the negotiating altogether for the entire country.
I'll make a couple points. One, there's clearly merit to hitting back against the Americans in certain ways and in speaking directly to the Americans like this ad sought to do. That was key to the Canadian strategy in the first Trump term. It was key to the Canadian strategy earlier this year. The challenge now is we are in a different time. Nobody else in the world is hitting back. As far as I can tell, no other country is running ads in the U.S. So it puts Canada out in front of the others as a target for the president. I think that's what we saw. So for that reason, I think it was right to pull back the ad. Second point is, I do think we need to get back to more of a Team Canada approach. The last few weeks, especially a couple of weeks ago when it seemed almost hourly, you'd have different press conferences from premiers fighting with each other, calling out the federal government. That presents weakness to the American side. It makes it harder to negotiate. So I do think more of a Team Canada approach is what's needed here. And I would note, and I think it's significant, both from the Prime Minister and Dominic LeBlanc's statement last night, that line about underscoring that it is the federal government's job to negotiate. I think that's very intentional, and it's a message from them to the provinces to rein it in a bit.
I wonder, though, as someone, again, who has experience with that Team Canada approach, does that require perhaps communicating more what is actually happening? Because I think there has been some consternation from some provinces that they don't exactly know what's happening in these talks, and the lid has been very tight for the Prime Minister and his team.
It definitely does. It's a balance. You can't reveal everything at all times, but having that constant communication with provinces, with stakeholders, with the country is critical to keeping Team Canada united. You're absolutely right.
What should the Prime Minister be trying to do now? You heard there from Frank McKenna, basically saying wait it out. Obviously, he's on this trip to Asia to diversify trade, which is also important. But it would be important to be talking again to the United States, and it doesn't sound like Donald Trump wants to do that. What would be your advice right now to try and get him to talk to us again?
Well, in the very short term, this Asia trip that's underway, the Prime Minister should be trying to find Donald Trump in the hallways. It's not always easy in these big summits. Have a constructive moment and try to avoid this 10% threat from actually taking effect. Ontario's now done the thing that the President wants. The ad will be pulled in the next 24 hours, so that gives the Prime Minister something positive to say to Donald Trump. He can also say, hey, this wasn't my ad, and it's gone. In the medium term, though, we do need to get the talks back on track because steel, aluminum, lumber, auto, they're all suffering badly. And unfortunately, waiting it out means those industries are going to suffer and we're going to see more job losses. So Canada does need to find a way to get back to the table.
Let me just end on what you think it means for the CUSMA negotiations broadly. I mean, we have heard from the Prime Minister in recent days seeming to suggest that the CUSMA might continue, but there would also be kind of side deals for all of those sectors you just laid out. Do you think that's where this is headed? I
do think that's where this is headed. In steel and aluminum, if there was going to be a deal coming together, which there seemed to be some optimism, it's going to be some sort of quota arrangement, some sort of sectoral deal contained within those two sectors. So we may see more of that in other sectors. In terms of the CUSMA review long term, I'm pretty pessimistic and frankly nervous about how this is going to unfold. And I think Canadians and business need to prepare for a pretty long and painful and uncertain process.
Brian Clow, always nice to see you. Thank you for making the time for us this Sunday. I appreciate it.
Good to be here.